Welcome to Vision in Action Live. We have a presentation today on scientific literacy and a discussion with Ms. Violet Detre, who is a coach, a speaker, and the author of Ready, Set, Go with Brian Tracy and 52 Ways to Do Business and Life in Joy. Welcome, Ms. Detre. I'm Jim Boswell. I'm your host and the author of Lifelong Fulfillment, Take Charge of Your Life. Today's presentation is on scientific literacy. This is where this discussion, we will be taking a look at scientific literacy's place in your personal development initiatives. And it's a perspective you're going to appreciate when you start into your own quest. So let's look at this in some detail. A quick look at publications and such tells us that scientific literacy is not a dominant thing. These are mostly US statistics. And one is that maybe about 5% of the population really is in tune with scientific literacy. And by scientific, let's just differentiate that from other kinds of literacy. What we're saying is it's about facts and things that we can trust, things that have been tested and proven. So if we look at the opposite side of literacy, there's scientific illiteracy. Well, if we look back, older statistics like back in 1992, 72% of teenagers still believed in angels and 50% in ESP. And nearly 36% of the population thought astrology was either sort of or very scientific. So if this is fine for when we're young and naive, but if continued in this fashion, this lack of literacy really denies us the opportunity to grow our potential personally, professionally, and as a species. So a self-fulfilling life requires the move from naive preconceptions, prejudices, and acculturation that we come to the table with a factual knowledge base. In part, that's what professional training is about. It's what college is about, and so forth, is to help introduce us to those disciplines and to get us more fact-oriented. Daniel Kahneman, who was a Nobel Prize winner in behavioral psychology, defined it as a system to brain doing logical functions. In today's discussion, we're going to amplify on that with Dr. Bauer, who wrote Scientific Literacy and the Myth of the Scientific Method. And yes, it's back from 1992, but there's some really good information here. So let's take a look at what he had to say. So we have to acknowledge that, when we're in our late teens and early 20s, we have the luxury of looking back and recognizes that we have gut feelings, we have intuition, we have an emotional environment we function in, and it's worked for us since our birth. And it's served to get us to the point that we're at through those childhood and adolescent times. But these things are essentially untested, subjective, and not necessarily reliable enough to continue to be used as we move forward. So what we're going to talk about is that if you don't change from illiteracy to literacy, you're not facilitating your adulthood, because adulthood deals a lot more with factual-based reasoning and the truths involved there, as opposed to emotion and so forth. So this started all back in about 1665 with Francis Bacon, who was recommending the movement toward objective and reliable truths. And we know as a fact, a lot of the developments that we live with and take for granted are really derivative technology based on scientific methods that actually deliver better decisions for us. They give us better economics, a good level of national security, a declining commitment to superstition, and more rational behavior being seen and done based on predictable consequences, but where we have been informed, and that it improves ethical attitudes as well. It does raise the question of whether scientific literacy is education or indoctrination. It does ask how much science is right for every man. And it tests our tolerance for continual updates, revisions, and changes, which are the hallmark of scientific inquiry. The electronics revolution, modern healthcare, and our trip to the moon demonstrates all this objective power to benefit you individually and humankind. So let's look at some of the hallmarks of a good scientific process. It says that we do observation, we do data collection, and we do analysis. We make conjectures about what we observe, what we derive. We may make theories or hypotheses that we can then go test and verify, or we test them and they fail. So it implies that we need to have experimental capability, that we need to be able to test these predictions. In sociology and psychology, it's typically reducing behaviors and observed things to statistics and saying, are these statistically significant? In chemistry and biology, we do things to animals and chemical compounds and we test them and they either fail or don't fail. And we retest. We don't just test it once, we test it multiple times to see if it is in fact true. Then we publish that data and we credit any predecessors who were doing work in and around there so that the public at large, particularly peers in science, will look at this and say, oh, that's right, or that has the ring of truth, but I don't necessarily agree with this, or this needs retesting or whatever. And so part of the process of science is to accept self-correction, rejection, modification on an ongoing basis. So science is basically sort of obsoleting its older achievements with its newer achievements over time. And if you're not comfortable with that kind of environment and going toe to toe with peers who have other opinions about the work and the resolution of scientific facts, well, then this is probably not your space. However, you can benefit from the final solutions that they present to the public. One of the things we have to do in science is avoid conflict of interest, bias, what's known as pseudoscience, error, dishonesty, mistakes, fraud, and obsolescence. And we have to trust that science until it becomes untenable or overridden by newer information. And then we can transition good science into technology applications. So your cell phone is an example of that. Modern medicine is an example of that. So this little diagram came directly out of Dr. Barr's book, and it's kind of hard to read, so we're going to blow it up in the next couple of slides. But the thing to see here is that he calls it a knowledge filter or a knowledge funnel, if you will. And at the very top is who we are at age, say 18 to 20. We're full of subjective, unreliable information. But over time, what we want to do is drive down that cone to where we've got this scientific filtering process that delivers reliable and objective information that we can make good decisions on and reduce the number of stray decisions that lead in, inappropriate directions. So let's look at the first top of the filter first. Okay, so when we are young, we are entirely surrounded by this subjective and unreliable world, except when we go to school, where some of these had then been reduced to facts. So it takes all of our human traits, our competence, our wisdom, our ability to communicate, whether we're conservative, whether we're pig-headed, or whatever, and it begins to winnow out the nonsense, the stupidity, and the pseudoscience that's involved in those opinions. It begins to make us ask, well, what will other people think about this? Or if I propose something, maybe I need to get it reviewed for, putting more brains on the problem. And maybe I can actually get money to pursue an investigation here. So along the right-hand side of that top column is your undergraduate and graduate education. So they're claiming that, or Dr. Bauer was claiming that all those human traits are in that first part of the funnel. In the second part, he goes to what he calls frontier science. Okay, this is where people are making silly conjectures. They can be really crazy things, but they're trying to sort through and get to facts. So they're part of the scientific process. And in doing so, they have to reduce the amount of bias that they come to the table with or derive from experimentation. They need to eliminate dishonesty, and they need to eliminate error. And so then they're at the point where they can say, okay, well, maybe this is real science. Maybe I can get this published. Maybe I can redo the test or whatever it is and see if it comes through like the original results did, and clean that up and say, okay, we see not only a trend, but we propose that this is the way this particular thing works. And in fact, we might present that as a seminar, we might do some preprint, we might share our findings with editors and get some feedback. So let's look at what happens then. So then we're in the good science in action particular part of this. So frontier is now becoming primary literature. So that's research papers. There's tons of technical journals where these get published, and they get what's called peer reviews. So if I'm a PhD physicist and I'm proposing something, my article will get reviewed in the appropriate physics kind of journal by somebody who's also a PhD in physics, who has some specialty in the very things that I'm interested in talking about. And so that's a very strong part of reducing science and improving it all the way along. So it gets rid of some of the misunderstandings. It clarifies some uninteresting things. And if there's any failures there, they get weeded out. In fact, that secondary PhD, who's the peer reviewer, might have a testing lab and might volunteer to turn around and do the same test to validate what the original scientist said. So ultimately, coming out of that, we're up to a secondary set of literature. And at that level, they're more summarizing the initial set of conclusions and so forth. They're really focused on mistakes and any obsolescence that may have overcome the hypothesis or the truth that they were initially able to propose. So time goes by, people use that new hypothesis as if it's fact until it doesn't work. And they check to make sure that it doesn't conflict with other disciplines. At that point, it's pretty much distilled down to the kind of science you're going to see in a textbook, which is mostly very reliable. So the thing here is, as more time goes by, things become obsolete, they become overcome by new information, and so on and so forth. So let me give you a couple of instances. So way back in the day, about 20 years ago, there was a thing proposed by some scientists called cold fusion. And cold fusion itself of, molecules together, atoms, is something that generates a lot of thermal heat, and it could be an energy source, but it requires heat to initiate it, the heat of the sun. Well, cold fusion in its terminology was, how do we do this at a colder temperature? And these scientists were proposing that they would be able to do it in a beaker, roughly at room temperature. Well, it took about 2 years, but the peer reviews and the follow-up testing and so forth invalidated their hypothesis. So this is the flip side of, how do we know science comes through with reliable facts, is that when we do bad science, we get caught and it gets invalidated. When we do good science, the kind that goes into rocketry, national defense, aircraft, the technologies that use the science that's generated, then we see it really in action. And so there was validity in what was determined. So let's look at how this shapes up for us. So as individuals, we really can't afford to continue to trust our personal gut and intuition for the truth. Yes, we may have it, but it's really important to validate that with some kind of factual input. We need objective, reliable, and factual data focus. in our adult lives. And scientific methods to date is and has been one of the best to help us promote modern progress and a reliance on information that's been determined to be valid. And unfortunately, personal development itself also depends upon facts. So if you're sitting here saying, I want to make emotional decisions, that's not a fact-based decision. If I want to do strictly based on inspiration without some underlying testing and validation, then you're taking a risk. These are the things that tend to waste your time and your precious resources. So you really want to focus when you're doing personal development on what are the facts? Tell me the facts. I can deal with those, and then I can move on and accomplish the goals I want to do. And you can get more details on this. There is a scientific literacy newsletter on lifelongfulfillment.com, and there's lots of other resources there for you to take advantage of. Please feel free. So now's the time in our program when we hear from point solution subject matter experts and people leading self-directed lives. Today's discussion is on individual personal coaching. Join me in welcoming Ms. Violet Detre. She's a coach, a speaker, and the author of Ready, Set, Go with Brian Tracy and 52 Ways to Do Business and Life in Joy. Ms. Detre holds a professional and executive master's coaching certificate through the International Coach Federation and a bachelor's degree in education and life coaching from Liberty University. Welcome to Vision in Action Live, Ms. Detre. It's great to have you.
Hi, Jim. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you so much for that introduction. You make me sound real good.
Well, you do sound really good. Now, did I miss anything in that introduction that you consider the audience needs to know?
Well, I am married to somebody who's prior military. I call him former GI Joe. We've been married 27 years. We've had the blessing of living in Germany, Florida, Colorado. We're now back in Texas. Yeehaw!
Yeah,
So,
that's great.
yeah.
That's great. So we want to explore some discussion and some perspective based on your experience and your credentials in the individual coaching arena. So why don't we start with, when, how, and why would someone look to engage a coach? Can you give us some idea about, where a person's mindset is at that point and help us understand how they find you and get started?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons to hire a coach. What I've been hearing is that gentleman that was on Silence of the Lambs that played Hannibal Lecter,
Yes,
he
ma'am.
had about 5 coaches. He had an acting coach, he had a body language coach, he had an eating coach. All the areas of his life that he wanted to improve, he had a coach for. And a coach is really important because they can see something from a different perspective that you can't. It's like they say that you're in a jar and you can't see the label from inside the jar.
Right.
So it's really important to have somebody else's perspective that can ask you questions, that can draw things out of you because the answers are mostly already inside of you. And the most important thing is accountability. Just knowing that you have to be accountable to someone every week, bi-weekly, or every month. You got to get those things done so they get you into action.
Right. Okay. All right. So if I'm engaging a coach, how do I go about discovering, why I'm stuck and what I want and, what my raison d'etre, the French for reason for living, is all about? Maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, well, there are like a myriad of coaches. There's life coaches, there's purpose coaches, like you were mentioning, finding my reason to live. There's career coaches. For me, right now, my arena is a Christian business coach.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's transitioning or, they know that they have a mission, they know that they have a message, they've lived this story and they are now thriving. They went from maybe something like me, I came out of multiple suicide attempts. I was under depression a long time. I had health issues, but
Mhm.
now I'm living a more joy-filled life. And what can we get out of your experience, out of your expertise, or out of your passion, even something that you love to do? I have a friend who loves working 9 to 5. So that
Mhm.
would be great for somebody that either somebody that's corporate that wants to find out, how can I get my people to be happy employees, to
Yep.
reduce attrition? What is this lady doing to show up that she loves this 9 to 5 job and she knows that it's very, very important? So what can we do from learning from her to instill that in my current employees so that they'll love coming to work, love what they do, and be more engaged? We can get more out of them, and we'll continue to have them as happy employees for the long term. So
Mhm.
things like that are some examples.
Okay. All right. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the process. You said you ask questions. What's the coaching methodology for those of us that don't understand it very well?
Well, Jim, right now the coaching industry is not regulated. So somebody can hang a shingle on their door and say, I'm a coach.
Oh, okay.
And not everybody follows the same procedure. The way that I was trained through the International Coach Federation, it's mainly asking questions. The client is, like you said, self leadership. They're the
Hmm.
ones in charge of their goals, they're the ones in charge of the action steps. All we have to do is hold the space and make sure to get down, peel back the layers so they understand what's underneath those things so that we can make sure to reach those goals. For example, I was thinking today, oh, I want to get these things done, but why am I not getting them done? Well, is my vision not strong enough? Is my why not strong enough? Um, is Are the rewards, what are the rewards that I'm getting from doing things that are unresourceful,
Hmm.
and how can I move that to, hey, seeing the rewards from being resourceful, completing those goals, doing the things that we need to do, focusing on those, like for example with Christian business coaches, income is one of the things that we focus on. The income producing activities. How can we let go of all those distractions, make sure that we focus on those things that are the most important?
Hmm. Okay. So you work on goals and priorities, and so it sounds like your client would necessarily actually be doing those definitions and that kind of brainstorming themselves. Uh, how do you elicit that and walk them through the process? Do they come to you knowing how to do that, or is that something you teach them to do?
And again, it depends. Some people are who are very into professional development or personal development. They understand why they think, metacognition. They think about why they're thinking what they're thinking. They think about motivation. They think about some of the things maybe that they have gone before that they haven't healed yet, and how to overcome those things.
Mhm.
But most of the population is not familiar with some of those terms. So we would have to educate them by asking questions. And this is where my gift of curiosity is really helpful. Sometimes I have conversations just asking questions because, you know, uh, for some reason my brain works that way. It's kind of analytical, kind of wants to put pieces together, and the pieces don't come together properly. My brain says there's a gap here. So I
Mhm.
ask a question, and the more questions that we ask, and it's important to ask open-ended questions.
Mhm.
Sometimes we may think we see the answer, which we may be right, but in most cases we may be wrong because we don't know exactly. We have not been in those person's shoes, don't know exactly what situation and all the little intricacies that go along in life. So we may be totally off, and we don't want to throw them off. Plus, the buy in. In order for them to buy in to these action steps, if they come up with them themselves, they'll be more motivated to take those action steps rather than hearing somebody else telling them what to do. It's part of self-leadership.
Right. Right. Okay. Um, so one of the questions that came up was, how do you acknowledge and the lessons that get learned, the progress that gets made, and that sort of thing? And how do you deal with it when it's not happening? In other words, when it's problematical and they're not meeting goals.
Right. So we, or at least me in my coaching, I studied appreciative coaching, which is focusing on your strengths, appreciating all those things that you have done in your life, making sure that we focus on wins rather than on, because what you focus on grows. And an example that was given to me by a prior mentor was, if you're rowing in a canoe and they tell you, oh, stay away from that boulder, guess what? You will tend to focus on that boulder and steer toward that boulder, and then it's not going to turn out well. So what we want to make sure to do is focus on, where do we want to go? And it's important that we acknowledge our wins, that we start off the conversation in a positive way, and there's always a lesson learned, because you don't fail. You either win or you learn, and it's important to be able to learn from every single little step, especially in entrepreneurship and being a coach. When we're out there and we're trying to advertise, there's little tweaks that always have to be done. And we saw in 2020 during the pandemic, if people didn't pivot, if people didn't move to where the market was flowing, that's it. Some of those businesses are dead now. So it's important to be able to be flexible. It's important to be able to come to the session. If you didn't get those action steps done, why? What is the underlying thing that is happening? How can we overcome these obstacles? And not only say, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to overcome these obstacles, but kind of do a preemptive thinking. Like, I asked one of my coaching clients recently, take me through your day. For example, you wake up in the morning, what happens? Then what do you do? Then what do you do? Okay. So these are the things that we can already look ahead and be able to take care of them prior to them happening, rather than, just going out there and expecting landmines everywhere and not being able to have that support.
Okay. All right. So is there any case of coaching that you've had so far that really stands out in your mind, something you could share with us to talk about what it was like, how they made progress, what results might have been like?
Yeah, it's really great because for some reason, men have been easier to coach. And I was coaching a fellow coach. He was studying coaching, but he was also a policeman. And we were working on different areas of life. We were working on, his coaching goals. We were working on, it wasn't necessarily toward what he got. What he got was a promotion. And he got that promotion because of what we had done, all the foundation steps that we had done through coaching and everything that he was learning. And like you said, Jim, he was learning how to be a self-leader. And in his, that job that he was in, because he wasn't fully coaching yet, they saw his improvements. They saw that he was showing up differently. They saw that he was, taking responsibility. And every time you get those wins, you just show up differently. And they started seeing a different person, and they said, hey, let me give you this promotion. So sometimes it's not even the direct goal that you get to, but everything else around it that gets improved.
Right. So that's really great that that's happening. And I'm sure that's very powerful for the people that go through it. It occurs to me that I was doing some market research on, coaching and how much demand there is for it. And it sounds like there's a lot of growing demand for coaching, but yet the coaches, I think they number like 35,000 in the US, the ones that have been certified. It seems like there's not enough of them.
Hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Had you heard anything like that?
No, I had not heard ever since I was in graduate school. We did do that type of research to
Right.
figure out, is this a viable business to get into?
Right.
Is spending all this money on college going to be worth it at the end? And it was a growing industry then.
Hmm.
More and more people were getting into coaching. So I'm a little surprised that there's not more people coaching out there, because everybody has experience. Everybody is a few steps ahead of somebody else.
Hmm.
I don't know if you remember that movie. I think it was called Catch Me If You Can. It was,
Oh, yes.
yeah, it was based on this gentleman who actually pretended to be a professor. I think it was sociology or something.
Hmm.
And he was doing it for a while. But after he was caught, that was one of their biggest questions. Like, how were you able to teach other students something that you had no idea about? And that was his secret, being one chapter ahead than anybody else.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, I know coaching also requires a certification, or at least there's certification bodies for that. And you mentioned earlier that anybody can call themselves a coach. So that's kind of a flag for, the population out there that wants help, right? How do they, is the coach the right place to start as opposed to, say, a counselor, an advisor, a therapist, or whatever? I mean, do I know enough intuitively to make that decision? Or is there a reason to really start off with a coach and find out and then maybe graduate to other help? How does that work in your experience?
Um, well, for me, when I was going to therapy, it didn't work.
Hmm.
But I know for a lot of people, it does help. Therapy and medication. For me, neither of those helped me. Um, and therapy, for my understanding, it's more for people like, let's say this is the x-axis, this is
Hmm.
normal or average. People that are up here above average in their mental health, then a coach is perfect for them. People that are down here still struggling with certain issues or habits, or maybe addictions, a lot of inner healing, some trauma, then therapy is probably going to be best for them. But they could also work in conjunction. You can be
Hmm.
working on your inner self and also be able to be with a coach. And another way that I heard this also is that therapy sometimes helps people to go from here and then deal with the past. And coaches, the best way they can help you is going here to your future goals and dreams.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's very informative. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Uh, so ICF is the oldest certifying agency for coaches. Is that right?
I believe it's the most recognized, the most organized,
Yeah.
the one that gives you different accreditations, that they require recordings, and the most, to me, the most reputable, the most trusted. But there are several others out there that are pretty good as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So how did you come to coaching? What made you decide that that was your career path?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. Well, when I was younger, I remember, I don't know if it was first or second grade. I remember my neighbor, he failed first grade. And I
Hmm.
said, how in the world could somebody fail first grade? School is awesome and amazing. To me, it was easy. So that was the first spark to say, hey, I want to help others to improve, or to be able to, now I'm like, make
Hmm.
things easy for them, so they can accomplish what they want to do or what they set out to do. But then I went through a lot of health issues. I had, some trauma that I was dealing with. And that's why I had, the multiple suicide attempts. And after I healed already from the mental, emotional, spiritual issues that I was going through, uh, my husband's co-worker, when my husband was in the army back then, they're basically army property and they need to be there. They need to be basically on call. If the general is there and he says come in, then you go into work. It doesn't matter if your wife's having a baby or anything like that. So because my friend graduated from Liberty University with I believe with an A, I said, wow, they work all the time. They're deployed to very dangerous places, and he was still able to finish his coursework.
Uh-huh.
So this would be a great place to start. And when I looked at their course catalog, I saw, oh, asking questions, listening, being empathetic with people, caring about their goals, and being able to just be there for them, and me not being responsible for their goals and actions, but they're responsible for their goals and actions. And we help them to triumph and get to their goals. Sign me up. It seemed like a perfect match.
Well, good for you. Well, we're kind of coming to the end of our little talk. I wanted to ask if you had any final comments for the audience about what you do, coaching, anything in general that you want to leave them with.
Wow, Jim. I have so much to leave with them. So, how much time do we have here?
Well, a couple minutes. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that, I learned from everything that I've gone through is that we can, and it is kind of our birthright to enjoy life. So whatever we're doing, it's important that we can do it with joy, that we have fun, that it aligns with our values. And those are all things that coaches can help you with. If in any way you're not able to reach your goals, if you have a dream and a goal that you've been wanting to reach for a long time, it's time to dust it off and call a coach. Because, that's what we love to do. We love to see our clients win. That's how coaches win, is being able to be there as a cheerleader. As my husband says, because he's a coach through the John Maxwell Leadership Training Institute, he calls it grace in your face. He's like, do I have permission to put a little fire under that tushy and help you to see, and course correct whenever that's needed.
Right. So Violet, if somebody needs to reach you to entertain your services or find out more about you, how would they go about doing that?
They can go on my website, which is violetdetre.com, or they can also reach me on Instagram, which is violet_Detre.
Okay, real good. Well, listen, Violet, this has been really great. We appreciate your perspective and hope to see you again sometime.
Thank you so much, Jim. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So in closing today, I want to thank our guest, Ms. Violet Detre, for attending us. And we want to thank you very much for tuning in to Vision in Action Live. We hope you found it informative and interesting. Remember, we have these podcasts once every week. They are announced. You'll find that podcasts include important personal development material from Lifelong Fulfillment and interviews with subject matter experts and people already leading self-directed lives. So check out the newsletters for details of the podcast, the book Life Fulfillment, collateral materials, and a lot of other assets on lifelongfulfillment.com. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, other podcasts, Link Local Network, and KFRED Internet Radio, to name a few. Again, I'm Jim Boswell, your host. Your comments and questions are welcome at the website and at jim@lifelongfulfillment.com. We look forward to seeing you again on another episode. Till then, have yourself a great week.